Welcome again, friends. Welcome to a discussion of the Gita. Thank you for joining us again. Lou, good morning.
Good morning. How are we doing today? We start a new chapter. I always get a little excited when we're starting a new chapter.
Yeah, we're starting this royal chapter today. So without further ado, let's do chapter 9, verse 1 and 2 together. So verse 1 says, "To you who does not cavil, Cavil, I will tell you the greatest secret, knowledge together with wisdom, having known which you will be free from evil." Let's go over all of that, but let's do verse 2 also. Verse 2 says, "The royal knowledge, the royal secret, the supreme purifier is this directly realizable, righteous, very easy to practice, imperishable." So, big words, big verses,
Yeah.
words that we may not even have heard before, like cavil and carp. Let's go through all of that. So, cavil means somebody who makes petty or unnecessary objections. You know how when you have certain classes, teachers, you have somebody who keeps objecting, said, but, and
Right.
unnecessary and petty objections.
Right.
And what Krishna is saying to Arjuna in this verse is, you who does not cavil. So cavil is somebody who keeps objecting without really objecting to anything significant. It's petty, unnecessary. And carp, C-A-R-P, means not the fish, Lou, but carp means to complain or find fault.
Yep.
So somebody who's always carping is always saying, "Yeah, this teacher, I don't know if she's any good, he's any good, he always does this, he does that," that kind of stuff.
Right.
Carping and caviling is an impediment to knowledge. So when somebody is, and therefore Krishna is saying to Arjuna, since you don't cavil, I'm going to tell you this royal secret. And we're going to break this verse down into many. So he says, to you who does not cavil. So we're going to talk about caviling. I will tell you the greatest secret. We'll talk about what the secret is. Knowledge together with wisdom. We'll talk about that. Having known which you will be free. We'll talk about how he will be free. And from evil. So we'll talk about what evil means.
Right.
And then we'll talk about what royal secret this is. So carping and caviling, constantly finding objections, making objections, petty, complaining about the teacher, is an impediment to knowledge. Why? Because as long as you find fault and criticize, you do not gain the knowledge. Why? Because what you're really saying is, I know more than the teacher knows. I know more than this Gita or the scriptures.
Right.
I don't believe it, And as long as you feel that way, you're not going to learn, because you have to have an open mind.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you don't ask questions. It doesn't mean that you don't clarify your doubts. You do, but not just for the sake of arguing and saying, because you have no confidence. You must have that attitude, I don't know. I don't understand. I don't know. Please explain it to me. And then when the person explains, if you don't still understand, ask questions, but ask from a genuine standpoint. Like, I don't know, please explain. Rather than, I'm going to cavil so that you stumble and I'll show you I'm better than you.
Right.
So that is the cavil. Then comes the, hold on one second, sorry. We're talking then, we will get to knowledge and wisdom, but let's do also verse 2 now, the royal knowledge, because it's in sequence. The Raja Vidya is the king of, Raj means king
Right.
of all knowledge. Atma Vidya is knowledge of the Atman. The absolute knowledge which illuminates all other knowledges is the royal knowledge. So, for instance, awareness, consciousness, pure knowledge comes from the Atman, the self. The awareness is awareness of everything around you. That comes from the Atman.
Right.
Consciousness of your body, of all your senses, 5 senses, consciousness of your mind and all the emotions, consciousness of the intellect, what you know, what you don't know, consciousness, awareness, and knowledge of your waking state, your dream state, your deep sleep state. pure knowledge of what I know, what I don't know. All of this comes from the Atman, the self, the enlivening force within you, the electricity that makes you alive. Now, why is it a great secret? Is because you don't know yourself. You know everything else, but you don't know yourself. You could be a nuclear scientist. You
Right.
could be a geneticist. You could know a brilliant scientist, but you don't know yourself. And that's why it's a great secret and great. In those days when the Gita was written, there were kings, and the king was considered to be the greatest. So the royal knowledge, the royal secret, is this awareness of the Atman. Now, again, royal, why? Because you could learn. You say, I don't know medicine. I have to go through so many years of medical school, medical college to get to be a doctor, but I can get there. But you can get there, you can learn all about medicine, you can learn about science, astronomy, and nuclear physics, and all kinds of other things, but you still don't know the self. And when you know the self, then you've known everything. All of this falls apart when you know that. Once you get to the royal, there's nothing more. You can get to know all of these other things, but only when you know the self, there's nothing more to know. So the analogy in the scriptures is that of a dream, that in the dream you think, oh wow, I'm stuck in this castle, I have to look for the openings. How can I get out? How can I get in?
Right.
And you look around and you try to find out everything you can about whatever it is you're dreaming about. When you wake up, no matter how much knowledge you had in the dream of whatever it was that's what's in the dream, when you wake up you say that was unimportant,
Right.
unnecessary.
Right. Yeah.
And when you wake up, there's nothing more that you need to know about the dream. So, what the scriptures are saying is that, believe it or not, when you come out of this life, when your life force leaves your body, your causal body leaves, your subtle body leaves, you will realize that there's nothing more to be known.
Hmm.
And not until that time. So, you will not know it until you wake up. So, then we talked about, I will give you knowledge together with wisdom. Krishna says this throughout the Gita. And usually, what we recognize is that we hear things. In those days, the Gita, the Upanishads were transmitted by mouth. So you heard what the teacher had to say. And that was knowledge. When you got that information, the knowledge, if you sat down and you thought about it, it became manana. So Shravana and Manana.
Hmm.
Shravana was listening, Manana was contemplating, meditating, thinking about it, and that became wisdom, or Jnana and Vijnana. Knowledge is information, wisdom is application of that information and knowledge.
Right.
That's wisdom. By contemplating, you get to be aware of it. So, an example in common everyday life is, we all know what we should do and we shouldn't do. We know it. It's information, it's knowledge, but we don't put it into action because we don't have the wisdom to apply it. So, doctor says, you've got diabetes, my friend. You shouldn't be eating sugar or sweet stuff. We know it, but
Hmm.
we quote unquote forget, and we give in to our temptations. We eat a piece of cake, we eat some candy. Your spouse says, what did you just, what? I left that cake there, who ate it? And you say, well, so you have the knowledge, you have the information, but you don't have the wisdom. Similarly, the knowledge and information and wisdom about our whole life, including getting to self-realization or self-development. Now comes desires. Desires are considered in every religion to be bad. They're considered devil, shaitan, maru. These are all bad and impure because they disturb the mind. Whether we're alive or even after we die, those desires continue to disturb our peace of mind. And when they don't have desires, when a person doesn't have desires, that person is considered to be at peace, and the mind is peaceful and calm and quote unquote in heaven.
Hmm.
Whereas when they're impure, they disturb the mind. Unfulfilled desires also cause mental disturbances. Desires that are fulfilled cause disturbances because you
Yes.
want more desires.
Hmm.
There are many kinds of desires, which we'll get into one day, but the worst kind are those desires that are selfish and egocentric. Me, I want this for myself, fame, popularity. Those vasanas or desires disturb the mind the most, as opposed to desires to do something for somebody else. Those are also desires that cause you mental disturbance because you're so fervently desirous of doing something for somebody else, but they disturb you less because they're not selfish or egocentric. And the only way for us to reduce those is by self development, by gaining this knowledge. As I have studied, and I'm like, as I said before, I'm like in kindergarten or first grade, as compared to swamis who are, PhDs in this. And I feel the difference within myself. And as you, my friend, are listening to this, you will get the benefit from self development. As you start gaining this knowledge, your lower desires drop off. There's lower desires and higher desires. Those desires that have come to you as impressions in your causal body, vasanas that are many, 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 many lives old, those are the strongest and the hardest to get rid of. Those are the higher desires. The mind becomes more peaceful as the lower desires drop. And as it becomes more peaceful, your mind is able to, because it's not disturbed by all of these desires, it becomes sharper and sharper, laser sharp. Now, there's also a concept of conscience. We've all heard of consciousness and conscience, just so that everybody's on the same page. When I go for surgery to an operating room and the doctor gives me anesthesia,
Hmm.
I am completely out of it. The person takes a knife, a scalpel, and cuts me open, and I don't feel a thing.
Right.
When I wake up, when I become conscious, I say, "Is the surgery over?" Say, "Yeah, everything's done. Your spouse is by your side, your kids are by your side." Say, "How do you feel? How do you feel?" Say, "I feel okay. What happened? How long was I out?" What that meant is I was not conscious. I was unconscious. That's consciousness, right? We all are conscious of what we do. And I'm doing this, forgive me, many of you may say, why is he even explaining this? Some people may not know, and I bear
Right.
with me, so we all are on the same page. So that's consciousness. A conscience is what in Sanskrit is known as sukshma buddhi, and conscience is sukshma buddhi. Conscience tells you what is right and what is wrong.
Hmm.
Don't do that. There's a certain part of us that says, each one of us, no matter how bad a criminal you are or how little morals, ethics you have, there's a part of even that person that has a conscience that says, what you did was not right. That sukshma buddhi, that conscience, is considered a beacon of light, right? Keep in mind that that beacon of light telling you which way you should be going. It's like pitch dark, this world, and that beacon of light, if you follow it, going in that direction, wherever the conscience tells you to go, conscience tells you to go, if you go that way, you're going without any disturbance, no friction, smooth. So, as opposed to going against your conscience, you are meeting resistance. So recognize that when you're in a river, if you've ever swam in a river or ocean where there's a current, if you swim in the direction of the current, you move very fast. If
Right.
you swim against the current, it becomes hard because you're going against friction. So if you follow this beacon of light, which is your conscience, it shows you the way and you feel righteous. So you notice that in verse 2, he talked about righteousness, and that's why I'm describing this. Anything that your conscience approves of is righteous. Go along with your conscience. You're going along with the current. You cannot go wrong. Your conscience will direct you to say this is right and this is wrong. And if you go with what is wrong, you're going against your conscience, you will get mental disturbance as a result. It will bother you and you will pay the price as karma. Now, the desires. Pursuit of sensual and material desires goes against your conscience. Whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not, even though you say, justify it by saying, this is good, what I'm doing is great, I don't see nothing wrong with it. There's a part of your mind that is telling you this is not right.
Right.
Now, it may not be quote unquote bad, but if it's not right, your conscience will tell you. The doctor says don't eat sweet and you're having ice cream, your conscience is telling you
Yeah.
you shouldn't be eating this. Now, you may say, well, I'm not hurting anybody else. I'm only hurting myself, right? The doctor told me not to do it, but I'm not hurting the doctor. I'm not hurting anybody else. But your conscience says it is not right. Don't do it. And when you go against your conscience, that is when you start getting worry, anxiety, stress, and strain. So, if you want to lead a life free of worry, anxiety, stress, and strain, do not do anything against your beacon of light, against the current of water, or against the airflow, against your conscience. Now, in this verse, he also talks about sin, which he calls in Sanskrit pap or
Mhm.
evil.
Right.
Now, there's no such thing as evil or sin or pap. It's just, again, the mind is agitated because of desire ridden actions. You have desire ridden actions, your mind gets agitated because it wants more of that or you didn't get it. That sin is a vasana or a desire which provides mental agitations and sorrow. So far, so good, Lou. Did I make it very
Yes.
confusing?
Yes. No. We're exploring the role of the conscience in the disturbance of our mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just worry that I might make it too confusing. So if you have any questions, folks, please write to us, write to me in this Facebook, and I will answer any questions that you have. Now, the verse 3 says, men devoid of shraddha. Shraddha is a Sanskrit word that cannot easily be translated into English. But for the simple translation, it's translated as faith or devotion.
Mhm.
Men devoid of shraddha in this dharma. Dharma is another word that's not easily translatable, but let's say supreme knowledge is what it can be translated. Men devoid of faith, devotion in this supreme knowledge, without attaining me, return to the path of the mortal world, is
Yeah.
what verse 3 says. Now, mortal world means the world that gets born and dies. So everything from childhood onwards, we are born and die. So he's not only talking about us as human beings being born and die. That's the birth and death that we tend to know about on the surface. But when the sun rises, the day is born.
Mhm.
When the sun sets, the day has died and evening is born. When the nighttime comes, evening dies, night is born. And this way the whole day is it goes on. One day dies, the next day is born. So in that way a whole week is born. So each one of us has the same sort of thing. We're born, we're infants, infancy dies, childhood begins, childhood dies, adolescence begins, adolescence dies, young manhood begins. And in this way a human being's life is continuous. So that's the Brahma, which causes the birth, Vishnu, that maintains it, and Shiva, that causes death. So, in this circle of birth and death is the mortal world that Krishna says that as long as you reach me, you will give up this whole cycle of the mortal world of birth and death. So, we've now come to the halfway point of the Gita. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
18 chapters. We're now on the ninth chapter. And this is a chapter with 30 verses in it. I think there's 30 verses, slightly longer than the shortest one, which had 28. But when we get to the end of chapter 9, we're halfway through. And then we have the next 9, which is very, very interesting, and I hope you will journey with us through that so you can get to be more self-developed and control your own desires and get to peace and harmony within yourself.
Yeah, it's been a great journey. And if you're listening to us on podcast, you can head on over to the Facebook page, Gita Memoirs of a Psychiatrist, see videos of these podcasts, and interact with us with comments and questions. And if you're watching on the Facebook page and you want to take us along in your car or on your walks or out sitting at the beach or wherever, you're not so much now up here in New England in
No.
September, you can go to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. And we'll see you next episode.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.